I Go to New York, An English Learner's Journey. It was the middle of July when I first set foot on American soil. The heat from the tarmac hit me as I stepped off the plane, but it wasn't the weather that overwhelmed me. It was the city, the great city of New York, that made my heart race. I had dreamed of this moment for as long as I could remember, and yet, as soon as I arrived, I felt a mixture of excitement and fear that churned in my stomach. New York City was nothing like the small town I had grown up in. Back home, everything was quiet, predictable. The streets were narrow, lined with modest homes, and everyone knew each other. People smiled as they passed by, and I could walk down any road without ever feeling lost. But here, the streets were chaotic, wide, and filled with honking cars. Taxis whizzed by, and people rushed past in a hurry, heads down, eyes fixed on their phones or the path ahead. I clutched my backpack tighter, wondering if I would ever fit in with the rhythm of this city. My English wasn't perfect, and I had come to New York to improve it. That was the dream. To learn English in the heart of one of the most iconic cities in the world. To experience life in a place where every corner seemed to pulse with possibility. I had enrolled in an English language course that was supposed to help me not just with vocabulary and grammar, but also with speaking confidently. Back in my home country, I had studied English for years, but speaking it in real-life situations was a completely different challenge. As I navigated through the bustling JFK airport, I realized that I was truly on my own. I had saved up for this trip by working 2 part-time jobs and skipping many nights out with friends. The sacrifices had been worth it, or so I hoped. Now, standing in a sea of people, I felt like a tiny drop in a vast ocean. I glanced at my phone and saw the address of the small apartment I had rented for my stay. It was in a neighborhood I had never heard of, but I had researched enough to know how to get there. I took a deep breath and joined the queue for a taxi. The driver, a man with a thick accent of his own, asked where I was headed, and I fumbled with my words, struggling to pronounce the street name. "Don't worry," he said with a smile. "I know where you mean." His kindness eased some of the tension in my chest, and I settled into the back seat as we pulled away from the airport. The drive into Manhattan felt surreal. I had seen New York in movies and TV shows, but nothing compared to seeing it with my own eyes. The skyline loomed in the distance, a mixture of steel and glass that sparkled in the afternoon sun. As we crossed the bridge, I marveled at the sheer scale of the buildings. They stretched into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. The streets were packed with people, all moving with purpose, like a river flowing through the heart of the city. When we finally reached my destination, I stepped out of the cab and stared up at the apartment building in front of me. It was an old, red brick structure with a small fire escape ladder running down the side. It wasn't glamorous, but it was exactly what I could afford. I dragged my suitcase up the stairs and into the tiny 1-bedroom apartment that would be my home for the next 3 months. The first night was hard. I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window. Car horns blared, and I could hear people shouting in the distance. It felt so different from the peaceful nights back home, where the only sound I heard was the wind rustling through the trees. I missed the quiet, the familiarity, but I reminded myself that I was here for a reason. I had come to New York to challenge myself, to push my limits, and to grow. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I set out for my first day of class. The language school was located in Midtown, and as I walked down the busy streets, I felt a nervous excitement building in my chest. The school was housed in a tall office building, and I found myself in an elevator surrounded by other students, all of them holding backpacks and notebooks. We exchanged awkward glances, but didn't speak. Maybe they were just as nervous as I was. In class, our teacher, a friendly woman named Miss Turner, introduced herself and asked us to do the same. One by one, the students stood up and said their names and where they were from. There was a girl from Brazil, a man from Japan, a couple from Spain, and several others from all over the world. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and stood up. "My name is Alex," I said, my voice shaky. "I'm from Romania." The words felt clumsy in my mouth, but I got through it. Miss Turner smiled and nodded, as if to say, "You did fine." As the days passed, I started to find my rhythm in the city. Each morning, I would wake up early, grab a coffee from the corner cafe, and make my way to class. After school, I would explore different neighborhoods, trying to absorb as much of the city as I could. There was always something new to see. A street performer playing guitar in Washington Square Park, a food vendor selling hot dogs on a busy corner, or an art gallery tucked away in a side street. New York was a city of endless possibilities, and I was determined to experience as much of it as I could. But it wasn't always easy. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by the language barrier. I would overhear people speaking on the subway or in a restaurant, and their words would swirl around me, too fast to catch. I struggled to keep up in conversations, and there were times when I felt embarrassed, unsure of how to express myself. But I kept pushing forward, reminding myself that learning a new language took time and effort. Each day, I learned a little more, and each day, I grew a little more confident. One afternoon, after class, I found myself wandering through Central Park. The sun was shining, and the park was filled with people enjoying the warm weather. I sat down on a bench and watched as children played in the grass and couples strolled hand in hand. For a moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Despite the challenges, I was starting to feel like I belonged here, like New York was becoming a part of me. As the weeks turned into months, I began to form friendships with my classmates. We would meet after school to practice English together, exploring the city as we learned. One of my closest friends was a girl named Maria from Brazil. She was funny, outgoing, and always willing to help when I struggled with a word or phrase. We would sit in cafes, sipping coffee and practicing our conversations, laughing at our mistakes and encouraging each other to keep going. One evening, Maria invited me to a rooftop party in Brooklyn. "You have to come," she said. "It's going to be amazing." At first I was hesitant. I wasn't sure if I was ready to socialize with native English speakers outside of the classroom. But Maria insisted, and before I knew it, I found myself on a rooftop with a stunning view of the Manhattan skyline. The party was in full swing, with people chatting, music playing, and drinks being passed around. I stood by the edge of the roof, staring out at the lights of the city, when a man approached me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, gesturing to the view. His accent was thick, and at first I wasn't sure if I understood him correctly, but I nodded and smiled. "Yes, it's amazing," I replied, trying to sound as confident as possible. He introduced himself as John, and we struck up a conversation. At first, I was nervous, stumbling over my words and struggling to find the right phrases. But as the conversation went on, I began to relax. John was patient, and he didn't seem to mind when I made mistakes. By the end of the night, I realized that I had spent hours speaking in English, and it felt like a breakthrough. For the first time, I wasn't just learning the language. I was living it. As my time in New York came to an end, I reflected on everything I had experienced. The city had tested me in ways I hadn't expected. There were moments of doubt, frustration, and loneliness, but there were also moments of joy, discovery, and growth. I had come to New York to learn English, but I had gained so much more than that. I had learned about myself, about my resilience, my ability to adapt, and my determination to chase my dreams. On my last day in the city, I found myself standing in Times Square, surrounded by the bright lights and the endless stream of people. It was a place I had seen so many times in movies, and now it felt like the perfect spot to say goodbye. As I stood there, I realized that New York had become more than just a city to me. It had become a symbol of possibility, of adventure, and of the courage it took to step out of my comfort zone. I took one last deep breath, inhaling the energy of the city, and then I turned and walked away, ready to take everything I had learned back home with me. As I walked away from Times Square, the lights and sounds of the city fading behind me, I felt an unexpected heaviness in my chest. It was strange. I had spent months feeling overwhelmed by the noise, the crowds, and the speed of life in New York. But now, as I prepared to leave, I felt a pang of sadness. This city, in all its chaos, had become a part of me. My flight was scheduled for the following morning, so I still had one last night in New York. I hadn't planned much for my final evening, but as I made my way back to my apartment, a thought crossed my mind. I had explored so much of the city, Midtown, Central Park, Brooklyn, but there was one place I hadn't visited yet, and I knew it would be the perfect way to end my journey. The Statue of Liberty. It felt almost like a cliché, something every tourist did when they came to New York. But for me, the Statue of Liberty represented something more. It wasn't just a monument or a landmark. It was a symbol of everything this city had come to mean for me. Freedom, opportunity, and the courage to pursue something greater. So instead of heading back to my apartment, I found myself at the ferry terminal, buying a ticket for the last boat ride to Liberty Island. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the water as I boarded the ferry. The air was cool, and the wind whipped through my hair as I stood at the edge of the boat, watching the city skyline shrink behind us. The ferry ride was peaceful, a welcome change from the constant noise of the city. As we approached the island, I could see the Statue of Liberty in the distance, her torch held high, shining against the darkening sky. I had seen pictures of her 1,000 times, but seeing her in person was different. She was massive, towering over the island, her presence commanding and graceful at the same time. When we docked at the island, I joined the small group of tourists making their way up to the base of the statue. There was a calmness here, an almost sacred feeling, as if everyone understood the significance of this place. I stood at the foot of the statue, staring up at her face, and for a moment I felt a connection to something larger than myself. This statue had stood here for over a century, welcoming people from all over the world. People who had come to New York just like I had, seeking something better, something new. I sat down on a bench near the water, the statue towering behind me, and I thought about everything I had learned during my time in New York. My English had improved, there was no doubt about that, but the lessons I had learned went far beyond language. I had learned how to navigate a new culture, how to adapt to situations that scared me, and how to trust myself, even when I wasn't sure of the outcome. There had been times when I wanted to give up. I had felt lost, confused, and out of place, more times than I could count. There were days when the language barrier seemed like an insurmountable wall, and I questioned whether I had made the right choice in coming here. But with each challenge, I had grown stronger. Each mistake had taught me something valuable, and each small victory had given me the confidence to keep going. As I watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the water, I realized that this journey was only the beginning. New York had been a test of my resilience, my adaptability, and my determination. But there would be other challenges ahead, and now I felt ready to face them. I stayed on the island until the last ferry was about to leave. As I boarded the boat for the ride back to Manhattan, I took one last look at the Statue of Liberty, her torch shining brightly in the distance, and I smiled. I wasn't saying goodbye to New York. Not really. The city, and everything I had learned here, would stay with me long after I left. Back at my apartment, I packed the last of my belongings into my suitcase. The room, which had once felt cramped and foreign, now felt strangely familiar, like a place I could call home if I stayed longer. I looked around one last time, taking in the view from the window, the sound of the city below, and the feeling of accomplishment that filled my chest. The next morning, I woke early, the sun just beginning to rise over the city. I grabbed my suitcase and stepped outside, breathing in the cool morning air. The streets were quiet, a rare moment of stillness in a city that never seemed to sleep. I hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of the airport. As we drove through the streets, I watched as the city came to life. Shop owners unlocking their doors, commuters heading to work, and the first glimmers of sunlight reflecting off the skyscrapers. At the airport, I checked in for my flight and made my way to the gate. As I waited to board, I thought about the people I had met, the places I had seen, and the lessons I would take with me. There was Maria, with her infectious laughter and her constant encouragement. There were my teachers, who had patiently guided me through the complexities of the English language, always with a smile and words of reassurance. There were my classmates, each of them, like me, navigating the same struggles and victories, but from different parts of the world. In many ways, we had all been connected by our shared experiences in this city, each of us chasing the same dream, to learn, to grow, and to become something more than we were when we arrived. As the boarding announcement came over the speakers, I felt a pang of nervous excitement in my stomach. It was time. I had waited so long for this moment. The moment when I would take everything I had gained from New York and carry it with me into the next chapter of my life. But now that the moment was here, I couldn't help but feel a sense of longing to stay just a little longer, to soak in just a few more experiences, to walk those bustling streets one last time. I found my seat on the plane, settled in, and gazed out the window as we taxied to the runway. The cityscape of New York slowly fell behind us as we rose higher into the sky, the buildings becoming smaller and smaller until they looked like mere dots on the horizon. I watched until the city disappeared completely, swallowed up by the clouds, and I realized that while I might be physically leaving New York, a part of it would always stay with me. The plane ride back to Romania was long, giving me plenty of time to think. I replayed the memories of my time in New York over and over in my mind, each one feeling more vivid than the last. I remembered the first time I successfully ordered a meal at a restaurant in English, the feeling of triumph when I had finally been able to communicate without hesitation. I thought about the evenings spent walking through Central Park, the beauty of the city at night, and how it seemed to change depending on where you looked. There had been nights where I sat in my apartment, struggling to understand the television shows I tried to watch in English. I would rewind scenes again and again, trying to grasp what the characters were saying. It had been frustrating, and at times I had wondered if I would ever truly improve. But now, looking back, I realized that every small effort had added up. I had not only learned a language, I had learned how to persevere, how to push through the discomfort and doubt that comes with trying something new. When the plane finally touched down in Bucharest, I was greeted by the familiar sights and sounds of home. The cool breeze, the sound of people speaking Romanian around me, it all felt comforting, yet somehow different. I had changed. I wasn't the same person who had boarded the plane to New York months ago, full of dreams but unsure of how to make them a reality. I had grown, matured, and proven to myself that I could face the unknown and come out stronger on the other side. As I gathered my bags and made my way through the airport, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. There was so much I still wanted to do, so many goals I had set for myself. My time in New York had only been the beginning. I knew now that I could accomplish more than I had ever thought possible. The world didn't seem so big anymore. Instead, it felt like a place full of possibilities, and I was ready to explore them. Back home, I reunited with my family. They greeted me with open arms, asking about my experiences in the United States, eager to hear stories of the city they had only ever seen on television. As I sat down with them, sharing tales of the Statue of Liberty, Times Square, and the people I had met, I realized how much I had to say. Every corner of New York had been an adventure, a new story waiting to unfold. But what surprised me most was how comfortable I felt speaking English now. Even though I was back in Romania, I found myself thinking in English, forming sentences in my mind as if it had become a second nature. My family noticed too. "Your English has improved so much," my sister remarked, a hint of admiration in her voice. "You sound like a real New Yorker now." I laughed, but deep down, I felt proud. All those nights of practice, those moments of frustration, had led to this. I had done it. As the weeks passed, I started to adjust to life back in Romania. I resumed my daily routine, but things felt different. I had grown accustomed to the fast pace of New York, the constant energy, and the diversity of people from all walks of life. Back home, things moved slower. Life was more predictable, quieter, but I found peace in the familiarity too. The streets I had grown up on, the faces I had known all my life, the comfort of speaking my native language with ease. I began looking for ways to continue improving my English. I knew that just because my time in New York had ended didn't mean my learning had to stop. I joined online forums where I could practice English with people from all over the world. And I found a local language exchange group where I could help others learn Romanian while improving my own English. These small steps kept me connected to the language and allowed me to share my experiences with others. One day, as I was scrolling through my emails, I saw a message from Maria. She had stayed in New York, and from the sound of her message, she was thriving. She wrote about the rooftop parties she had been to, the new friends she had made, and how her English had continued to improve. She also told me about her plans to study at a university in the United States, her dream becoming more real with each passing day. Reading her message brought a smile to my face. Maria had been such an important part of my journey, and knowing that she was doing well filled me with happiness. But it also reminded me of my own dreams that had been born in the heart of New York, surrounded by skyscrapers and the constant hum of the city. The truth was, even though I was back in Romania, a part of me still longed for the adventure of New York. I missed the challenge of navigating a new culture, the thrill of learning something new every day. I realized that I wasn't done with New York. Not yet. There was more I wanted to explore, more I wanted to achieve. And so, a new goal began to form in my mind. I would return to New York, not as a student this time, but as someone ready to take on the city with confidence. I began researching opportunities for work, internships, and study programs that could bring me back to the United States. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but my time in New York had taught me one invaluable lesson: that I was capable of achieving anything I set my mind to. I started preparing for the next chapter. I dedicated myself to improving my English even further, taking online courses and practicing with anyone I could. I saved every penny I earned, just as I had done before, knowing that each small step would bring me closer to my goal. I reached out to people I had met during my time in New York, building connections and staying in touch with the city I had come to love. As the months went by, I felt that same excitement building inside me, the same excitement I had felt when I first boarded the plane to New York all those months ago. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't uncertain. I knew what I wanted, and I knew that I had the strength to achieve it. The day finally came when I received an email from a company in New York. They were offering me an internship, a chance to return to the city to work in an environment where I could continue improving my English and gain valuable experience. I stared at the email in disbelief, my heart racing with excitement. This was it. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. I accepted the offer without hesitation, and just like that, my journey to New York was set in motion once again. The city that had once felt so overwhelming, so intimidating, was now a place I couldn't wait to return to. I was no longer the nervous student struggling to communicate. I was someone who had grown, learned, and thrived in one of the most challenging environments in the world. As I packed my bags for the second time, I couldn't help but think about how far I had come. New York had tested me in ways I never could have imagined, but it had also given me the tools to succeed. I had learned that the greatest challenges often lead to the greatest rewards, and that the only limits we face are the ones we place on ourselves. When I boarded the plane this time, it wasn't with uncertainty or fear. It was with confidence, excitement, and a deep sense of purpose. I was ready for whatever the city had in store for me, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life with open arms. New York had become more than just a place. It was a part of me now, woven into the fabric of who I had become. And as the plane took off, soaring through the clouds, I knew that I was returning not just to a city, but to a place where I had found my true self, a place where anything was possible. As the plane flew through the clouds, I gazed out the window, the familiar feeling of excitement and anticipation surging through me. This time, though, it was different. The nervousness I had felt the first time I flew to New York was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. I was no longer the wide-eyed, unsure traveler. I had been here before. I had walked those streets, faced the challenges, and come out stronger. This time, I was returning not as a visitor, but as someone ready to take on the city with purpose. The descent into JFK Airport felt like a homecoming. The city sprawled out beneath me, its towering skyscrapers and grid-like streets glowing in the early morning light. The sight of it filled me with a sense of belonging I hadn't expected. New York had a way of getting under your skin, of making you feel connected to it in ways that were hard to explain. I had felt it when I left, and now, as I returned, that connection was even stronger. After landing, I moved through the familiar process of customs and baggage claim, my heart pounding with excitement. This time, there was no hesitation. I knew exactly where I was going, what I needed to do. I hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of the company where I would be interning. As the taxi sped through the streets, I watched the city unfold around me. The same busy streets, the same towering buildings, but somehow it all felt new again. The company was located in Lower Manhattan, a stone's throw from the financial district. As I stood in front of the building, suitcase in hand, I took a deep breath. This was it, the next step in my journey. I walked into the lobby, my nerves settling as I reminded myself how far I had come. I wasn't just here to learn English anymore. I was here to contribute, to work, to be a part of something bigger. The first day of the internship was a whirlwind of introductions and orientations. I met my team, people from all over the world, each with their own stories, their own reasons for being in New York. It reminded me of the language school I had attended, where every person I met had come to the city with a dream. Now we were all chasing new dreams, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose as I joined them. The work itself was challenging, but in a way that excited me. I was working in a media company, helping to coordinate international projects, and my English was put to the test every day. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt ready. My months of study and practice had prepared me for this, and with each passing day, I became more confident in my ability to communicate, to contribute, and to thrive in this environment. Outside of work, I found myself falling back into the rhythm of the city. The apartment I had rented was small, just like before, but this time it felt different. I knew how to navigate the subway, how to order food, how to find the hidden gems of the city that tourists rarely saw. I reconnected with some of the friends I had made during my first visit, including Maria, who was now attending university in the city. We met for coffee one evening, catching up on everything that had happened since we last saw each other. Maria was thriving. She talked about her classes, her new friends, and the endless opportunities the city offered her. I could see the excitement in her eyes, the same excitement I felt every time I thought about what the future held. It was strange to think how far we had both come from those early days when we were just trying to learn the basics of English. Now, here we were, both building our lives in a city that had once seemed so intimidating. As the weeks turned into months, I settled into my new routine. I worked hard during the day, learning everything I could from my colleagues and supervisors. They pushed me, challenged me, and helped me grow in ways I hadn't expected. My English continued to improve, not just in terms of vocabulary or grammar, but in the way I communicated my ideas, the confidence I felt in speaking up during meetings, the ease with which I navigated complex discussions. But it wasn't just about work. New York was a city of endless possibilities, and I made sure to take advantage of every opportunity that came my way. I explored neighborhoods I hadn't visited before, tried foods I had never heard of, and attended events that opened my eyes to new cultures and perspectives. The city felt like a living, breathing entity, constantly changing and evolving, and I was a part of it. One of the most memorable moments came during a weekend trip to the Bronx. A colleague had invited me to a cultural festival celebrating the diverse communities that called New York home. It was a vibrant, energetic event, with music, dancing, and food from all over the world. As I walked through the festival, taking in the sights and sounds, I felt a deep sense of connection, not just to the city, but to the people who lived here, each of them bringing their own stories, their own traditions, to this melting pot of cultures. The festival reminded me of why I had come to New York in the first place. It wasn't just about learning English or advancing my career. It was about experiencing life in all its diversity, about pushing myself out of my comfort zone, about growing not just as a professional, but as a person. New York had given me that opportunity, and for that, I would always be grateful. As my internship progressed, I began to think about the future. I knew my time in New York wouldn't last forever, at least not this time. But I also knew that I didn't want this to be the end of my journey here. I started exploring options for staying in the city longer, perhaps finding a permanent job or pursuing further studies. The idea of leaving New York, of returning to the life I had known before, seemed unimaginable now. This city had become a part of me, and I wasn't ready to let it go. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in Battery Park, overlooking the Statue of Liberty in the distance. It was the same place I had visited on my last night in New York during my first trip. But this time, I wasn't saying goodbye. I was planning my next steps, thinking about how I could continue building my life here. The city had opened so many doors for me, and now I was ready to walk through them. The company I was interning for offered me a full-time position shortly after my internship ended. It wasn't a decision I took lightly. Accepting the offer meant committing to a new chapter of my life, one that would keep me in New York for the foreseeable future. But as I sat there, watching the boats sail by, the skyline of the city stretching out before me, I knew there was no other place I wanted to be. I accepted the offer the next day. The next few years in New York flew by in a whirlwind of work, growth, and new experiences. The city continued to challenge me, but it also rewarded me in ways I could have never imagined. My career flourished, and I built a network of friends and colleagues who became like family to me. I explored more of the city's hidden gems, from the vibrant street art of Bushwick to the quiet beauty of the cloisters in Upper Manhattan. I continued to work on my English, always striving to improve, always looking for ways to communicate more effectively. But by this point, the language becomes second nature to me. I no longer thought of myself as someone who was learning English. I was simply living my life in a new language, in a city that had become my home. Looking back, I often marveled at how much had changed since that first nervous flight to New York. I had come to the city with the simple goal of learning English. But what I gained was so much more. New York had taught me about resilience, about the power of perseverance, and about the beauty of embracing the unknown. It had shown me that the world was full of opportunities if I was brave enough to seize them. And as I walked through the streets of the city each day, the skyline towering above me, I knew that no matter where life took me next, New York would always be a part of my story. It was the place where I had discovered my true self, where I had learned to dream bigger than I ever thought possible. And for that, I would always be grateful. Years passed, and I continued to carve out a life in New York City. What had once been a temporary journey for the purpose of learning English had evolved into a full-fledged career, a network of friends, and a place I proudly called home. The city had transformed me, and in turn I had found ways to contribute to it, giving back to the community that had given me so much. The job I accepted after my internship became the foundation of my career. Working in media allowed me to witness the fast-paced world of communication, storytelling, and global collaboration. Each day presented new challenges, but I embraced them with the same energy that had driven me when I first arrived. I attended meetings where I discussed project strategies, pitched ideas to clients, and managed international campaigns. Slowly but surely, I became an integral part of the team. One day, after completing a particularly challenging project, my supervisor called me into her office. She smiled warmly as I sat down, and I could sense something significant was about to happen. "Alex," she began, "we've been really impressed with your growth over the last few years. Your ability to adapt, learn quickly, and handle pressure has set you apart. We'd like to offer you a promotion to a senior position." I felt a wave of pride wash over me, This was the kind of moment I had dreamed about. It wasn't just about career advancement, it was proof that the journey I'd embarked on years ago, fueled by curiosity and determination, was bearing fruit. My family's support, my long hours of study, my perseverance in navigating the complexities of language and culture, all of it had led to this. "I'm honored," I said, smiling as I accepted the offer. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a reflection of how far I had come since those early days of grappling with the basics of English. As my career flourished, I realized that I wanted to do more than just succeed professionally. I wanted to help others, those who, like me, had come to New York with dreams of building a better life, but who needed guidance and support. I began volunteering with organizations that offered language classes and mentorship to immigrants. Many of the people I worked with were from diverse backgrounds: students, professionals, parents, all trying to navigate the challenges of living in a new country. Each week, I would sit down with a group of individuals who were eager to improve their English. We'd practice speaking, listen to conversations, and engage in role-playing exercises that real-life situations. As I watched them progress, I saw glimpses of my own journey in their eyes. The frustration, the determination, and eventually the triumph when they mastered a new phrase or sentence. Helping others on this path became deeply rewarding for me, reminding me of the importance of giving back. One student in particular, a young woman named Sophia from Colombia, reminded me of my early days in New York. She had moved to the city with her family and was determined to learn English so she could attend college and study medicine. Sophia struggled with the language at first, just as I had, but she had the same tenacity I had seen in myself. We worked closely together, and over time, I watched her confidence grow. Sophia often shared her dreams of becoming a doctor, and I encouraged her every step of the way. Eventually, she applied to several colleges, and when she received her first acceptance letter, she burst into tears of joy. That moment made me realize how powerful language can be. It's not just about communication. It's about opening doors to new opportunities, about enabling people to pursue their dreams. Through my work with these students, I found a new sense of purpose. I had always been passionate about learning, but now I saw that I could be part of someone else's journey, helping them achieve what once seemed impossible. New York had given me the tools to succeed, and now I was using those tools to uplift others. As time went on, my connections in the city deepened. I attended networking events, industry conferences, and social gatherings where I met people from all walks of life: artists, entrepreneurs, activists, and scholars. Each person had their own story, their own relationship with New York, and I felt privileged to hear about their experiences. It reminded me how diverse and dynamic the city was, a place where people from every corner of the globe could come together and create something extraordinary. One evening, I attended an art exhibit in Chelsea, hosted by a colleague who had recently launched a gallery. The exhibit featured the work of immigrant artists, each of whom used their art to tell the story of their journey to the United States. The pieces were bold, emotional, and thought-provoking, capturing the essence of the immigrant experience, the hopes, the fears, the triumphs. As I walked through the gallery, admiring the art, I felt a deep connection to the stories being told. The art mirrored my own journey in many ways. The sense of longing, the struggle to find a place in a new world, and the ultimate realization that home is something you carry within yourself, shaped by your experiences, your choices, and the people you meet along the way. One of the artists, a man from Syria named Amir, approached me as I stood in front of his painting. It was a striking piece, depicting a winding road through a desolate landscape, with a single figure walking toward a distant horizon. This piece is called The Journey, Amir explained. It represents the path we take when we leave our home, not knowing where it will lead us, but believing that something better lies ahead. His words resonated with me deeply. I know exactly what you mean, I said. I've been on that journey too. We spent the next hour talking about our shared experiences as immigrants in New York, the challenges we had faced, and the ways we had both found solace in art and community. Amir's story was one of resilience and hope. And as we spoke, I realized that New York was full of people like him, people who had come to the city searching for something more, and who had found it in unexpected ways. That night, I walked home through the quiet streets of Manhattan, reflecting on how far I had come. My journey had been long and at times difficult, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. I had learned that New York wasn't just a place to live. It was a place where you could reinvent yourself, where you could build a new life from the ground up, no matter where you came from or what language you spoke. As my career continued to grow, I began to take on more leadership roles within the company. I managed teams, coordinated projects across multiple countries, and helped shape the company's global strategy. Each new challenge pushed me to think critically, to adapt quickly, and to trust in my abilities. My work brought me into contact with people from all over the world, and my fluency in English allowed me to communicate effectively in high-stakes situations. But even as I climbed the corporate ladder, I never lost sight of the importance of personal connections. The relationships I had built in New York, both personal and professional, were what kept me grounded. I stayed in touch with the friends I had made during my early days in the city, and I made a point to mentor new employees who were just starting out on their own journeys. One of the most meaningful relationships I developed during this time was with a colleague named David. He was a seasoned professional, someone who had worked in the media industry for decades, and he became a mentor to me. David had a wealth of knowledge about the industry, but what impressed me most was his genuine interest in helping others succeed. He took the time to listen, to offer advice, and to challenge me to think beyond the immediate task at hand. David and I often stayed late at the office discussing the future of the industry, the changing dynamics of media in a globalized world, and the importance of staying adaptable in an ever-evolving landscape. His guidance helped me see the bigger picture, and it wasn't long before I was given more responsibility within the company. I was promoted again, this time to a director-level position, overseeing international operations. With each step up the career ladder, I felt a growing sense of fulfillment, not because of the title or the salary, but because I had earned it. I had proven to myself and to others that I was capable of not only surviving in New York, but thriving. The city had shaped me into someone I never imagined I could become. A leader, a mentor, and a successful professional in one of the most competitive industries in the world. Years after my arrival in New York, I found myself standing on the rooftop of my apartment building, gazing out at the skyline. It was a familiar sight, but it never lost its magic. The lights of the city twinkled like stars, stretching out as far as the eye could see. It was a view that reminded me of everything I had accomplished, of the journey that had brought me here. In that moment, I thought about all the people who had supported me along the way. My family back in Romania, who had believed in me, even when I doubted myself. Maria, who had been with me during those early days of learning English. Sophia, who had shown me the power of perseverance. And David, whose mentorship had helped me realize my full potential. As I stood there, I realized that my journey was far from over. There were still new challenges to face, new opportunities to seize, and new dreams to pursue. But no matter where life took me next, I would always carry a piece of New York with me. The lessons I had learned here, the grit, the resilience, the ability to adapt, were etched into my soul. This city had given me more than just a career or an education. It had shaped who I was and who I would continue to become. As the weeks turned into months, I began to think about new ways to challenge myself. My career had reached a point where I felt confident in my skills and my ability to lead. But I also knew there was more to life than climbing the corporate ladder. I wanted to expand my horizons, to explore new passions, and to give back even more to the community that had given me so much. One evening, as I was scrolling through emails, I came across an invitation to speak at a conference about immigration and language acquisition. The event was organized by one of the nonprofit organizations I had volunteered with, and they wanted me to share my story, how I had come to New York with little more than a desire to learn English, and how that journey had transformed my life. I hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't something I had much experience with, and the idea of standing in front of a large audience made me nervous. But then I remembered the countless challenges I had faced in New York. The times when I had been scared, uncertain, and out of my depth, and how each of those moments had pushed me to grow. This was just another challenge, another opportunity to step outside of my comfort zone. So I accepted the invitation. The day of the conference arrived, and as I stood backstage, I felt a familiar sense of anticipation. It reminded me of the first time I had arrived in New York, unsure of what lay ahead but determined to face it head on. When my name was called, I walked onto the stage, the bright lights shining down on me as I looked out at the audience. I began by telling them about my early days in Romania, about my dreams of coming to New York and learning English. I spoke about the struggles I had faced, both personal and professional, and how those challenges had ultimately shaped me into the person I was today. As I spoke, I saw nods of recognition in the audience. Many of them were immigrants themselves, and they understood the journey I had been on, because they had lived it too. I talked about the power of language, the way it connects us, opens doors, and allows us to communicate our hopes and dreams. I shared stories of the students I had worked with, people like Sophia, who had faced their own struggles but had persevered. And I emphasized the importance of community, of finding people who support and uplift you, especially in a city as vast and complex as New York. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. It was a moment I would never forget, not because of the recognition, but because I had faced one of my fears and come out stronger. More importantly, I had used my story to inspire others, to show them that no matter how daunting the journey might seem, success was possible. After the conference, several people approached me to thank me for sharing my story. Some were students, others were professionals, but all of them had been touched by what I had said. It reminded me of the power of storytelling, how sharing our experiences can bridge gaps, foster understanding, and create connections between people from all walks of life. As the years went by, my life in New York continued to evolve. I took on new challenges, both in my career and in my personal life. I began working on a project that focused on international media partnerships, traveling to countries I had only dreamed of visiting: Japan, Brazil, South Africa, each place offering its own unique perspective on the world. But no matter how far I traveled, New York always called me back. The city remained my anchor, the place where I had grown, learned, and become who I was. I still lived in the same apartment, though it now felt much more like home than it had in those early days. The neighborhood had changed, as neighborhoods in New York often do, but the sense of belonging I felt remained as strong as ever. I continued to volunteer, finding new ways to contribute to the immigrant community. I started a mentorship program at the nonprofit, pairing young immigrants with professionals who could help guide them through the challenges of building a life in New York. The program quickly grew, and I was amazed at the impact it had. Watching these young people find their footing, achieve their goals, and create a future for themselves filled me with pride. One evening as I was walking through Central Park, reflecting on how much my life had changed since I first arrived, I ran into Maria. We hadn't seen each other in a few years, but we had always kept in touch. She was now a doctor, working at a hospital in Brooklyn, and she was thriving. We spent the evening catching up, reminiscing about our early days in the city and marveling at how far we had come. "Can you believe it?" Maria said, laughing as we sat on a bench overlooking the lake. "Back then, we were just trying to figure out how to order coffee in English, and now look at us." I smiled. "I know. It feels like a lifetime ago, but at the same time, it feels like yesterday." We talked about our dreams for the future, the goals we still wanted to achieve. For both of us, New York had been the catalyst for so much growth and change, but we knew that our journeys were far from over. There was still so much we wanted to do, so much we wanted to give back to the city that had given us so much. One of the most profound moments of my journey came when I was invited to speak at a naturalization ceremony for new American citizens. I had received my own citizenship a few years earlier, a milestone that had filled me with pride and gratitude. Now, I was being asked to share my story with others who had come to this country in search of a better life. As I stood on the stage, looking out at the hundreds of people who were about to take the oath of citizenship, I felt a deep sense of connection to each of them. They came from all over the world, just as I had, bringing with them their hopes, their dreams, and their determination to make a new life in the United States. I spoke about my journey, about the challenges and triumphs of building a life in a new country. I talked about the importance of resilience, of never giving up, even when the path seemed uncertain, and I reminded them that they were now part of something bigger. A nation built on the dreams and aspirations of immigrants. As I finished my speech, I looked out at the audience and saw tears in the eyes of some of the new citizens. It was a reminder of how powerful and transformative the immigrant experience can be. We come from different places, speak different languages, but we are united by a shared desire to create a better future. After the ceremony, I stood outside the courthouse, watching as families celebrated, taking pictures, and embracing each other. It was a beautiful moment, one that reminded me of why I had come to New York in the first place, not just to learn a language or build a career, but to be part of a community, to create a life filled with purpose and meaning. As I look back on my journey, I realize that my time in New York has been about so much more than just surviving in a new city. It's been about thriving, about growing into the person I was meant to become. The city has taught me that challenges are opportunities in disguise, that the people we meet along the way shape us in profound ways, and that home is not just a place, it's a feeling, a sense of belonging that we carry with us wherever we go. New York will always be a part of me. Its streets, its people, its energy, they've become woven into the fabric of who I am. And though the future is full of unknowns, I know that whatever comes next, I will face it with the same courage and determination that brought me here all those years ago. My journey is far from over. There are still new horizons to explore, new dreams to chase, and new challenges to overcome. But one thing is certain: New York has given me the strength, the resilience, and the belief in myself to face whatever comes next with confidence and hope. And for that, I will always be grateful. Conclusion. Looking back, my journey to New York wasn't just about learning English. It was about finding my place in the world. The city taught me lessons far beyond language, shaping my identity, my career, and my understanding of what it means to pursue a dream. Achieving English fluency opened doors I never thought possible, connecting me to a global community and allowing me to help others along the way. I now realize that English fluency is more than just a skill. It's a bridge to new opportunities, relationships, and experiences, whether in the workplace, in my personal life, or in the volunteer work that I continue to do. It remains a cornerstone of everything I've accomplished. And as I look forward, I carry with me the lessons, friendships, and challenges of New York, a city that has shaped me in countless ways. My journey continues, but now I walk it with confidence, ready for whatever lies ahead.